The Byzantine Empire was ruled by the Palaiologos dynasty in a period spanning from 1260 to 1453 AD. From the restoration of Roman rule to Constantinople by the usurper Michael VIII Palaiologos to the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire. From the start, the regime faced numerous problems. The Turks of Asia Minor had since 1263 been raiding and expanding into Byzantine territory in Asia Minor. Anatolia, which had formed the very heart of the shrinking empire, was systematically lost to numerous Turkic Ghazis, whose raids evolved into conquering expeditions inspired by Islamic zeal. With a decreasing source of food and manpower, the Palaiologos were forced to fight on several fronts, most of them being Christian states. The Second Bulgarian Empire, the Serbian Empire, the remnants of the Latin Empire and even the Knights Hospitaller. The loss of land in the east to the Turks and in the west to the Bulgarians was complemented by two disastrous civil wars, the Black Death and the 1354 earthquake at Gallipoli, whose destruction and evacuation allowed the Turks to occupy it. By 1380, the Byzantine Empire consisted of the capital Constantinople and a few other isolated exclaves, which only nominally recognized the emperor as their lord. Nonetheless, Byzantine diplomacy coupled with the adroit exploitation of internal divisions and external threats among their enemies, and above all the invasion of Anatolia by Timur, allowed Byzantium to survive until 1453. The last remnants of the Byzantine Empire, the Despotate of the Morea and the Empire of Trebizond, fell shortly afterwards. However, the Palaiologan period witnessed a renewed flourishing in art and the letters, in what has been called the Palaiologian Renaissance. The migration of Byzantine scholars to the west also helped to spark the Renaissance in Italy. Background: following the Fourth Crusade, the Byzantine Empire had fractured into the Greek successor states of Nicaea, Epirus and Trebizond, with a multitude of Frankish and Latin possessions occupying the remainder, nominally subject to the Latin emperors at Constantinople. In addition, the disintegration of the Byzantine Empire allowed the Bulgarians, the Serbs and the various Turkoman emirates of Anatolia to make gains. Although Epirus was initially the strongest of the three Greek states, the Nicaeans were the ones who succeeded in taking back the city of Constantinople from the Latin Empire. The Nicaean Empire was successful in holding its own against its Latin and Seljuk opponents. At the Battle of Meander Valley, a Turkic force was repelled and an earlier assault on Nicaea led to the death of the Seljuk Sultan. In the west, the Latins were unable to expand into Anatolia. Consolidating Thrace against Bulgaria was a challenge that kept the Latins occupied for the duration of the Latin Empire. In 1261, the Empire of Nicaea was ruled by John IV Lascaris, a boy of 10 years. However, John IV was overshadowed by his co-emperor, Michael VIII Palaiologos. Palaiologos was a leading noble of military standing and the main figure of the regency of John IV, who had used this role to propel himself to the throne, and set the stage for his becoming sole emperor of the restored Byzantine Empire. Michael VIII Palaiologos (1261–1282). In 1261, while the bulk of the Latin Empire's military forces were absent from Constantinople, Byzantine general Alexios Strategopoulos used the opportunity to seize the city with 600 troops. Thrace, Macedonia and Thessalonica had already been taken by Nicaea in 1246. Following the capture of Constantinople, Michael ordered the blinding of John IV in December 1261, so as to become sole emperor. As a result, Patriarch Arsenios excommunicated Michael, but he was deposed and replaced by Joseph I. Restoration of Constantinople. The Fourth Crusade and their successors, the Latin Empire, had done much to reduce Byzantium's finest city to an underpopulated wreck. Michael VIII began the task of restoring many monasteries, public buildings and defense works. The Hagia Sophia, horribly looted in the Crusade of 1204, was refurbished to Greek Orthodox tradition. The Contiscalian harbour and the walls of Constantinople were all strengthened against a possible new expedition by the Latin West. Many hospitals, hospices, markets, baths, streets and churches were built, some with private patronage. Even a new mosque was built to compensate for the one burnt during the Fourth Crusade. These attempts were costly and crippling taxes were placed on the peasantry. Nonetheless, the city grew new cultural and diplomatic contacts, notably with the Mamelukes. Both had common enemies, Latin aggression, and later on, the Ottoman Turks. Foreign policy. The Sultanate of Rum was in chaos and decentralized ever since the Mongol invasions in California, 1240. As a result, the greatest threat to Byzantium was not the Muslims but their Christian counterparts in the West. Michael VIII knew that the Venetians and the Franks would no doubt launch another attempt to establish Latin rule in Constantinople. The situation became worse when Charles of Anjou, brother of the King of France, conquered Sicily from the Hohenstaufens in 1266. In 1267, Pope Clement IV arranged a pact whereby Charles would receive land in the east in return for assisting a new military expedition to Constantinople. A delay on Charles's end meant that Michael VIII was given enough time to negotiate a union between the Church of Rome and that of Constantinople in 1274, thus removing papal support for an invasion of Constantinople. Unfortunately for Michael VIII, the new union was seen as a fake by the Clement's successor, Martin IV. The Greek Church was excommunicated, and Charles was given renewed papal support for the invasion of Constantinople. In order to counter this, Michael VIII subsidized Peter III of Aragon's attempts to seize Sicily from Charles. Michael's efforts paid off with the outbreak of the Sicilian Vespers, a revolt that overthrew the Angevin king of Sicily and installed Peter III of Aragon as king of Sicily in 1281. For the remainder of his life, Michael campaigned to drive the Latins out of Greece and the Balkans, and secure his position versus the Bulgarians. He was largely successful, regaining several islands in the Aegean, and establishing a foothold in the Peloponnese that would grow to become the despotate of the Morea. The downside, however, was that Michael's efforts in the West absorbed most of the empire's manpower and resources, and neglected the Asian provinces, where a new and fateful threat was rising. The Beylik of Osman I, who by 1263 had captured Sogut. Nevertheless, the border was kept relatively secure, and no significant losses occurred in Asia Minor during Michael's reign. Domestic policy. Michael VIII's foreign policy relied heavily on diplomacy. Nevertheless, his construction projects and military campaigns against the remaining Latins were extensive as well as expensive. The Nicene army was modeled around the Komnenian army, and while it was not as effective, it was just as burdensome on the treasury. The result was that heavy taxes were levied on the peasantry, something that the Ottomans would later use to their advantage, winning over these poverty-stricken peasants with promises of lower taxes. The Second Council of Lyons in the ostensible union of the two churches did little to avert Catholic aggression, while at the same time the Orthodox population, led by large parts of the priesthood, denounced Michael VIII as a traitor. His death in 1282 came as a relief to many, and his body was denied an Orthodox funeral, as a result of his policies towards Rome. Legacy. Michael VIII was a very energetic, ambitious and capable emperor, who had enlarged and preserved the empire, and had once again made Byzantium a power to be reckoned with in the region. His army, however, was still small, and diplomacy was relied upon more than ever. An extortionate tax system supported his ambitious and successful foreign policies of expansion, as well as his numerous bribes and gifts to various potentates. He had put Byzantium on the road of recovery, but his achievements were still perilously fragile, as events would soon show. Andronikos II Palaiologos, 1282–1328 Andronikos II was the son of Michael VIII. He ascended the throne in 1282, at the age of 24. Foreign policy. Andronikos II was tied down with events in the west and the east. The Serbians under King Stefan Juras II Milutin had begun invading the Balkans and took Skopje in 1282, and raids against Macedonia were launched. Throughout the 1290s, Byzantine counter-attacks failed to stop these, and as a result Andronikos was forced to resort to diplomacy, marrying his 5-year-old daughter to the Serbian king and conceding a number of forts from Ohrid to Stipta Strumica as of dowry. Nonetheless, the Serbs continued their expansion. Unlike his father, Andronikos II recognized the gravity of the situation in Asia Minor, and tried to drive out the Turks, utilizing a variety of methods. His first action was to move his court to Asia Minor, where he could better oversee the construction of fortifications and raise troop morale. His general, Alexios Philanthropinos, was an able commander, campaigning with some success against the Turks in the Meander Valley. Unfortunately, Byzantium was robbed of his services when he staged an unsuccessful coup, leading to his blinding. Next, Andronikos sent his son, Michael IX, and the Heteroarch George Muzalan to attack the Turks who were laying siege to Nicomedia, but they were beaten at the Battle of Baphius in 1302. Not giving up, Andronikos hired the 6,500-strong Catalan company of Almogavars, led by Roger de Flor. Originating from Catalonia, these hardy mercenaries were used to skirmishing against the Moors in Spain, and now, for an extraordinarily high price, they drove the Turks back in Asia Minor. Once again, these successes were nullified when their leader, Roger de Flor, was assassinated on his way to meet Andronikos. The Catalans then revolted against imperial authority, and began pillaging and raiding cities in Thrace, leaving Asia Minor open to Turkish incursions. After this, Andronikos turned to diplomacy, asking the Ilkhanids of Persia to send troops to attack the Turks. But negotiations for such an alliance failed. Domestic policy. Andronikos II ordered the union of the Orthodox and Catholic churches to be cancelled, a move which pleased many. But he also ordered drastic reductions in the military, and effectively disbanded the navy, which his father had worked hard to build up. As a result, tax reductions throughout the empire were possible, earning him greater popularity while seriously undermining Byzantium's abilities to deal with its opponents. Whilst these solved some problems that Michael VIII had left for his son, it unraveled his father's attempts at restoring the power of the Byzantine Empire, where Michael VIII had attempted to deal with problems outside the empire. Andronikos aimed to solve the internal problems resulting from his father's reign. Civil war and abdication. Andronikos II's policies were not successful in dealing with Byzantium's external problems. However, it would be threats from within the empire that led to his abdication. In 1320, Andronikos III, the young grandson of Andronikos II, was disinherited by the emperor. Andronikos III's brother had been murdered and his father, the son of Andronikos II, died of shock. Andronikos III did not take his disinheritance lightly, organizing an armed opposition. He succeeded in drawing support with promises of generous tax cuts, even beyond those enacted by Andronikos II. Andronikos II was powerless to stop the young usurper. He granted him Thrace as an appanage in 1321, the title of co-emperor in 1322, and after a small war where the Bulgarians and Serbians played the two sides against each other, Andronikos II was forced to abdicate and retire as a monk to a monastery, where he died in 1332. Despite the calamities of the civil war, Andronikos III was about to revitalize the empire. Though Asia Minor was at this point destined to fall to the Turks, it had been in a worse position in 1091 and yet still recovered by Byzantium. Legacy Andronikos II attempted to solve Byzantium's internal problems more than his father had. The solutions he chose, however, had severe repercussions. They undermined the military and financial basis of the state, and the disasters suffered by his foreign policy failures further worsened the situation. Dissatisfaction from his failure, his old age and a reckless grandson, culminated in his abdication. Andronikos III, 1328–1341. Foreign policy. The rule of Andronikos III is characterized as the last genuine attempt to restore Byzantine fortunes. His attempts came close to fruition, but the many hostile neighbors of Byzantium eventually took their toll on an empire in decline. His first concern was that of Asia Minor. Nicaea, until 1261 the capital of the empire, was under siege by Ottoman Turks. In the summer of 1329, Andronikos III launched a relief attempt which culminated in a defeat of the Battle of Pelikanon on June 10, and in 1331, the city fell. Not wishing to see Nicomedia or the other few remaining forts in Asia Minor suffer the same fate, Andronikos III sought to pay off the Ottomans with tribute. The Ottomans did not stop at this and seized Nicomedia as well in 1337. Despite this, Andronikos III scored a few successes as well in the Aegean. In 1329, Chios was recovered, and in 1335, Andronikos arranged an alliance involving financial indemnities with the Turkic emir Bahaddin Umar, Bey of Aydin, and was able to recover Lesbos and Phasia from the Latins. In Europe, Andronikos III had mixed results. Thessaly returned to imperial rule in 1333, but Serbia once again began expanding southwards. Led by the Byzantine renegade Syrianus Palaiologos, Serbian forces took 5 key forts from Byzantium in 1334 and forced it to recognize the new borders. Nevertheless, Andronikos was able to bring back Epirus into the fold in 1341 through the use of diplomacy. The result was that whilst the empire was reduced to its European territories, it had succeeded in bringing much of Greece under its control. Unfortunately for the newly expanded Byzantium, Stephen Dusan decided to take these lands as well from Byzantium. The death of Andronikos III and the resulting chaos left the empire in no position to fight back. Legacy. Though ultimately unsuccessful, the reign of Andronikos III was one of the last bright spots in Byzantine history. As the empire's position was becoming increasingly precarious, diplomacy became less useful, as Byzantium's enemies realized that the emperor had not the military or even economic might to back his word. Whilst there was a general decline in the empire's fortunes, Andronikos III's death would be the coup de grace for the empire. His 10-year-old son was led by a regency that was torn apart in dynastic rivalries, which would lead to a civil war from which Byzantium would never recover.